I had gained some weight in old age. My belly wasn't flat anymore, my back sagged a little, and my clothes fit tighter. At first, I laughed along when my family joked about it. "Grandpa's turning into Santa," they'd say at Christmas. But soon, the laughter stopped being light-hearted. My son, my daughter-in-law, even my own grandchildren, they mocked me openly, snickered at my expense, whispered when I entered the room. One night at the dinner table, my son laughed so hard he choked while saying, "Dad's just a fat old man now." That was the moment I decided, enough was enough. And what I did next made them regret every cruel word. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. My name is Leonard Briggs. I'm 72 years old, a retired history teacher, and a grandfather of 4. I've lived in the same brick house on Willow Lane for nearly 40 years, the one with the maple tree Margaret and I planted our first spring together. Back in the day, I was lean and strong, the kind of man who could spend an afternoon building a tree house without breaking a sweat, then mow the lawn before dinner just because I liked the smell of fresh-cut grass. My students used to joke that I had more energy than the entire football team combined. I spent 35 years teaching history at the high school, and I loved it. The Civil War, the Great Depression, the stories of ordinary people caught in extraordinary times, I never grew tired of sharing them. Margaret said I carried history around in my bones. Maybe that's why I loved the classroom so much, it gave me a place to pass something on. When Margaret was alive, life had rhythm. She made sure of it. Breakfasts on the porch when the weather was warm. Church on Sundays. Family dinners every other week, where she fussed about the roast and reminded everyone to use a napkin. She was the glue, and I was the steady frame she glued everything to. The weight had come after Margaret passed. She had been gone 5 years now, and without her, the evenings grew longer, the meals lonelier. Nights that once rang with her humming while she folded laundry were now filled with the drone of the television just to keep the silence from suffocating me. I never cooked much for myself. Margaret had been the heart of the kitchen, always finding a way to turn even the simplest groceries into something warm and comforting. Without her, I leaned on takeout, frozen dinners, and bakery bread that went stale too fast. A man gets softer without someone watching out for him, reminding him to walk, to stretch, to cut back on sweets. My waistline grew, my back curved, and my energy waned. I thought the family would understand. I thought they'd see the grief behind the pounds, that they'd recognize a man doing his best to live without the only woman who had ever really known him. But they didn't. My son, David, had become the ringleader of the jokes. He was 50 now, with a thinning hairline and a beer belly of his own, though he preferred to wear loose shirts to hide it. "Careful, Dad," he'd chuckle at barbecues, patting my stomach like I was some kind of mascot, "you'll roll away before dessert." His wife, Marlene, never laughed outright, but she'd smirk behind her wineglass, her eyes glinting with judgment. At first, the grandchildren didn't mean any harm. To them, my round belly made me look jolly. They'd tug on my sleeve in December and whisper, "Grandpa, you're turning into Santa." They'd climb on my lap and ask for presents with giggles in their voices. For a little while, I let myself believe it was affectionate. That maybe the belly wasn't something shameful, just another way to make them smile. But children pick up quickly on tone, on the difference between laughter with and laughter at. When they heard their parents' sharp jokes, the kind with edges, they followed suit. The first cruel twist came at Thanksgiving, when my youngest grandson pulled a chair out for me and announced, "Better make sure it's strong enough." Everyone burst out laughing. I forced a grin, lowered myself into the seat, and prayed it wouldn't creak. By Christmas, the humor had turned into mockery. My oldest grandson slipped a pillow under his sweater and waddled around the living room chanting, "Grandpa, Grandpa," until the others collapsed in laughter. One of the girls snapped a photo on her phone, and I caught a glimpse of it being shared around the table, each laugh a little sharper, a little louder. I smiled then, for their sake. Pretended it didn't sting. Pretended it wasn't another knife between my ribs. But inside, a slow burn was building. We were gathered for my granddaughter's 12th birthday. Balloons bobbed against the ceiling, streamers curled along the mantel, and the kitchen smelled of vanilla frosting and melted wax. I had been looking forward to the cake, not just for the sweetness but because Margaret had always baked one from scratch. Ever since she passed, I tried to keep the tradition alive, store-bought, but still something that tied me back to her. This year, though, when the candles were lit and the children sang, Marlene emerged from the kitchen carrying a cake that made the air in the room shift. It was shaped like a pig. Pink frosting, a round belly, candy eyes, and even a chocolate-smeared snout. "There you go, Leonard," she said brightly, setting it in the center of the table. "Your own twin." Laughter erupted, sharp and unkind. David doubled over, clutching his side, and one of the boys oinked loudly enough to make the balloons quiver. The younger grandchildren hesitated, their eyes flicking to me for approval before they joined in, giggling as they chanted, "Grandpa Pig, Grandpa Pig." I stared at it, at the frosting folds meant to mimic fat rolls, at the gleam of the candy eyes, and something inside me twisted. My fingers dug into the arms of my chair until the wood bit back. "Come on, Dad," David said between wheezes of laughter. "Blow out the candles before you eat the whole thing." I forced myself to stand. My knees felt weak, but my face held the smile they expected. I leaned over the cake, the children's voices buzzing in my ears, and blew out the candles one by one. Smoke curled into the air like whispers of something darker. The room cheered, but the cheer wasn't for me. It was for the spectacle. For the cruelty disguised as humor. I cut the first slice myself, though my hand shook slightly as I pressed the knife through the thick pink frosting. When I placed it on a plate and slid it toward my granddaughter, she hesitated. Her eyes were uncertain, confused, as if she sensed the ugliness beneath the laughter. I gave her a smile, a real one, small but steady. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." Then I sat back down, folded my hands in my lap, and let the laughter continue. But inside, the burn became fire. That was the night I decided there would be no more smiles. No more silence. That was the night I began planning. Long after the laughter had died down and the pig cake was nothing but crumbs, I sat alone at my kitchen table. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock Margaret had picked out years ago. I couldn't stop replaying it all, the oinks, the pillow-stuffed mockery, the chair joke. Each memory stacked on the next until it felt like I was carrying bricks inside my chest. Mockery cuts deeper than most people realize. It's not just laughter. It's dismissal. It's a way of saying, "You don't matter. You're a joke. You're less than us." For months, I had told myself they didn't mean harm. That they loved me, even if they showed it poorly. But that cake proved otherwise. You don't bake a pig for a man who buried his wife and is just trying to keep his head above water, not unless you mean to gut him with it. So the question became, what would equal that? What blow could I deliver that would make their laughter stick in their throats the way those jokes had stuck in my heart? Money was the obvious answer. Every roof they lived under, every vacation they bragged about, every luxury they pretended was theirs, it all traced back to me. I had co-signed mortgages, covered shortfalls, paid tuition, written checks when they were between jobs. Without my steady hand, they'd have toppled years ago. Yes, money was power. And I held all of it. But it wasn't just about dollars. It was about dignity. About showing them that the man they mocked, that fat old Santa, was the same man who had kept their lives afloat. If they saw me as a joke, then I would make them see me as their reckoning. I poured myself a glass of water, the cold biting against my palm, and stared at the faint reflection in the window. Margaret would have told me to forgive. To take the high road. She was softer than I ever could be. But Margaret wasn't here to see them turn me into a circus act. I tightened my grip on the glass until my knuckles went white. They wanted a joke. I'd give them a lesson. And by the time I was finished, their laughter would be the last sound they remembered before everything fell apart. The next morning, I woke before dawn. Old habit. For years, Margaret and I had risen with the sun, she to brew coffee, me to grade papers before school. These days, the routine was hollow, but that morning, the stillness felt different. Sharper. Like the air just before a storm. I brewed the coffee anyway. Sat at the kitchen table with the mug warming my hands and spread out the folder I hadn't touched in years. It was thick with papers, mortgage documents, loan agreements, bank statements, investment records. So much of my life, reduced to ink on paper. So much of theirs, built on my signature. I leafed through the pages slowly, almost ceremonially. Each sheet was a reminder. The down payment I'd covered for David's first house. The emergency loan I'd given when Marlene lost her job. The tuition bills I'd paid without ever being asked to be repaid. Their lives, their comforts, their so-called successes, woven together with my money and my trust. And all I had gotten in return was laughter. The pig cake. The Santa jokes. The chair creaking under my weight while their eyes sparkled with cruelty. I tapped my finger on the top page, steady as a gavel. They thought I was weak because my body had softened. They mistook softness for surrender. They didn't understand that I'd spent decades teaching history. And history is full of men who underestimated the quiet ones. I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer's number. She answered on the third ring, groggy but polite. Mr. Briggs? What can I do for you? I sipped my coffee and stared at the pale morning light creeping across the table. I'd like to make some changes, I said. My voice sounded calm, steady, like I was discussing nothing more serious than a garden fence. In reality, I was rewriting the battlefield. Over the next week, I drove downtown 3 times, each trip with a neat stack of papers tucked under my arm. I signed forms. Initialed deeds. Reviewed clauses with a patience I hadn't known I still had. By the end of it, what once belonged to them, what they assumed was guaranteed, was no longer in their hands. Every signature felt like laying a brick in the wall between us. And when I sealed the last envelope and left the law office, I walked out into the late afternoon sun feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time since Margaret passed, I felt like myself again. Not a joke. Not a burden. A man with a plan. And soon, they'd learn exactly what it meant to laugh at me. The following Sunday, David called to invite me for dinner. His tone was cheerful, almost too cheerful, and for a moment I wondered if guilt had finally found him. Maybe the pig cake had weighed on his conscience. Maybe they were ready to apologize. I almost believed it. But as soon as I stepped into their dining room, I knew better. The table was set with more food than 10 people could eat: roast beef, potatoes, green beans, 2 bottles of wine. The grandchildren were already seated, whispering behind their hands and shooting me sly glances. Marlene greeted me with that thin smile of hers, the kind that never reached her eyes, and David clapped me on the back like I was his drinking buddy instead of his father. "Good to see you, Dad," he boomed. "Hope you saved room. We know you've got the appetite for it." The kid snickered. I forced a smile, pulled out a chair, and sat. Dinner began politely enough. Small talk about school, about work, about the weather. I chewed my food slowly, nodding when appropriate, letting the warmth of the roast linger on my tongue. For a fleeting moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd behave. But cruelty has a way of finding its opening. My grandson, the oldest, pushed back from the table and stood, holding a pillow under his shirt. "I'm Grandpa," he declared, waddling around the table. "Where's the food?" "Don't worry, I'll eat it all." The other children howled with laughter. Marlene didn't stop him. She raised her glass instead. "Careful, sweetie. If you get any bigger, we'll have to roll you down the hallway like your grandfather." David laughed so hard he had to put down his fork. "No kidding. Dad, if you get any larger, we'll start charging you rent for taking up 2 chairs. The table erupted. Forks clattered, children shrieked with laughter, wine nearly spilled. I sat there, motionless. The food on my plate blurred, the edges of the room softening as the sound pressed in around me. That was when the youngest piped up, my granddaughter, only 6 years old, her voice small but cruel in its innocence. "Grandpa's like a balloon," she giggled. "If we poke him with a fork, he'll pop." The adults roared at that one. And something inside me went still. I smiled faintly, as though I were in on the joke. Took another careful bite of beef. Chewed slowly. Swallowed. In that moment, I knew my plan wasn't just revenge. It wasn't just about money or dignity. It was survival. Because a man who stays in a house where he's mocked to his face is no longer a man. He's a shadow. And I refuse to be a shadow. I looked around the table, memorizing their laughing faces, their flushed cheeks, their careless cruelty. None of them knew that the papers had already been signed, the wheels already turning. Their laughter rolled on, blind and merciless. And I sat quietly at the center of it, smiling like a fool, while holding the knowledge that soon, very soon, the laughter would stop. The laughter eventually dulled into chatter. Plates clinked, wine flowed, and the children ran off to the living room, leaving the adults at the table. I stayed put, pushing the last of the potatoes around my plate, watching David refill his glass with the kind of confidence that only comes when a man believes the world belongs to him. "Dad," he said suddenly, leaning back in his chair, "have you thought about downsizing? I mean, that old brick house of yours must feel awfully big now that Mom's gone." Marlene's lips curved in that thin, knowing smile. He could sell it and move into something smaller. Maybe even closer to us. We could help you with the paperwork. I sipped my water, hiding the flicker in my eyes. "And what would you do with my old place if I sold it?" David didn't miss a beat. "Rent it out. Maybe flip it. Property values are great right now. Could be a nice little investment for the family." The family. Not me. Them. I let the silence hang, then asked softly, "And if I wasn't around, who would handle all that?" Marlene reached over, touching David's arm like they were a power couple in some television drama. "Oh, don't worry, Leonard. We'd take care of everything. You just enjoy your golden years. I nodded slowly, letting their words settle. Enjoy them, I repeated, as though I were considering it. The arrogance in their faces told me everything I needed to know. They believed I was already defeated. That I'd just keep writing checks, keep signing papers, keep playing the fool until the end. I folded my napkin carefully, placed it beside my plate, and leaned back in my chair. My voice was calm, almost conversational. You know, it's funny. You all talk as if I don't have much left. As if I'm just waiting around. But what if I told you I've been busier than you think? David laughed, dismissive. What could you possibly be busy with, Dad? Watching history documentaries doesn't count. Marlene chuckled into her glass. I smiled then, a slow, deliberate smile that made them both shift in their seats. Busy, I said, making arrangements. Their laughter wavered, unsure now. David frowned, setting down his wineglass. Arrangements? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. Yes. Arrangements for when I'm gone. Arrangements for the house, the accounts, the savings. For everything Margaret and I built together. The silence at the table was sudden, brittle. Marlene's eyes narrowed. And, what kind of arrangements would those be? I didn't answer right away. I let the question hang in the air, thick and heavy, watching their expressions tighten. Then I sat back, folded my arms, and gave them a smile sharp enough to cut glass. You'll find out soon enough. 2 weeks later, they invited me again. Another dinner. Another round of wine and polished smiles. I accepted without hesitation, though this time, I didn't come as their fool. I came as their reckoning. The house was warm with the smell of roast chicken and garlic bread when I stepped inside. The children ran past me, shrieking, and David clapped my shoulder like always, too loud, too casual, like nothing had changed. Marlene greeted me with that same thin smile, the one that had sharpened into a blade long ago. We all sat. Plates filled, glasses poured, chatter flowed. The same ritual as before. Except this time, I wasn't waiting. I set my fork down carefully and cleared my throat. My voice cut through the room, steady and cold. I have something to share with you all. The table quieted. Forks hovered in midair. Even the children paused, sensing the shift. You've spent months mocking me, I continued, my gaze moving from David to Marlene to each grandchild in turn. Calling me names. Turning my grief into a circus act. I laughed along, I stayed quiet, but while you were laughing, I reached into my jacket pocket and laid a stack of envelopes on the table. Thick, official, stamped in red. I was making arrangements. David frowned, reaching for one. He tore it open, his face draining of color as his eyes darted across the words. He opened another, then another, his movements growing frantic. What is this? His voice cracked, the confidence gone. I folded my hands in my lap. It's the truth. The house? No longer in your reach. The accounts? Closed to you. The investments you thought would trickle down into your hands. Donated. Every last penny. Marlene's face twisted. Donated? To who? To people who never laughed at me when I was broken. To causes Margaret cared about. To children who need homes, veterans who need help, families who know what it means to stand together. The silence was crushing. The roast sat untouched, steam curling into the heavy air. My youngest grandson whispered, "Grandpa," but his voice was small, uncertain. I leaned back, calm, almost serene. "You thought my weight made me weak. That the man you mocked would roll over forever. But I've carried all of you on my back for years. And tonight, I put you down." David's face flushed red, veins bulging in his neck. You can't just." "I already did." The words landed like a hammer blow. I stood, pushing back my chair slowly, deliberately, as though I had all the time in the world. I gathered my coat, straightened it on my shoulders, and looked at them one final time. "Enjoy the meal," I said. "It's the last one you'll eat at my expense." And with that, I walked out into the night, leaving them frozen in the ruins of their own arrogance. The phone call started the very next morning. First, David's number flashed across my screen. I let it ring until it went silent. 10 minutes later, Marlene tried. Then the children, each one in order, as though they thought I'd fold if I heard a younger voice pleading. I didn't answer any of them. By the end of the week, my voicemail box was full. The messages started polite, strained apologies wrapped in excuses. "Dad, we didn't mean it, you know we love you. Can we just talk?" But soon, the desperation leaked through. "Dad, the bank's on us about the mortgage. We didn't know you'd cut it off so suddenly. Leonard, this is Marlene. Look, whatever you donated, fine. But couldn't you have left something aside for the kids? They're your blood." And then, finally, the truth stripped bare. "You ruined us. After everything we did for you, how could you?" I sat in my chair by the window, the same chair where Margaret once read her books, and listened to every word without an ounce of regret. 2 months later, I saw them at the grocery store. Their clothes weren't polished anymore. David's shirt was wrinkled, Marlene's nails bare. They looked smaller somehow, like the world had finally pressed down on them the way it had pressed on me all those years. David spotted me near the bread aisle and hurried over, his voice low, urgent. "Dad, please. Just a little help. For the kids. You don't understand what we're going through." I met his eyes, those same eyes that had once laughed at me across a dinner table, bright with cruelty. And I felt nothing. "You don't understand either," I said quietly. "Respect isn't something you beg for after you've destroyed it. You had my love. You had my trust. And you threw it away for a laugh." His face crumpled, but I didn't stay to watch it. I turned, placed my loaf of bread in the cart, and walked toward the checkout. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not because the weight was gone from my body, but because I'd finally set down the heavier load, the one they'd piled on me with every smirk, every cruel joke, every sneer. They had mocked me for being soft. But now, they knew the truth. I wasn't soft, and I was finished with them.
Greetings, and thanks for spending your time with us today. I truly hope you enjoyed the video. I want to wish you a peaceful day or a restful evening, wherever you may be. Take care, and we'll see you next time.